Welcome to Voice of the Nation. Today we are going to talk about Sri Lanka, a country on the brink of economic collapse. The country is on the state of emergency. It has almost no money reserve left, no money to export necessity goods, food becoming more difficult to come by, and people are getting poorer and poorer. And now there are protests and violence on the street everywhere. How did it all come to this? Joining us today is Ajahn Piti Srisangnam, Director of ASEAN Studies Center of Chulalongkorn University. Will talk with us about what's happening in Sri Lanka. สวัสดีครับ
ครับ
อาจารย์ปิติ สวัสดีครับ
ครับ
First, can you tell us why this is happening in Sri Lanka? We know that Sri Lanka is a poor country, but many countries in that region are also very poor, like Nepal, Bangladesh, or Pakistan. So I was wondering how Sri Lanka got into this breaking point.
Actually, Sri Lanka is not a poor country. After the end of the conflict between Sinhala people and Tamil people back in the late 2000s, we see a lot of developments in Sri Lankan economies, especially during the year 2017-2018. GNI or gross national income per capita of Sri Lanka people can be considered as the upper middle income countries. So they are the same group as Thai economies in the year 2017-2018.
Okay. Oh, and what is the major income for Sri Lanka? Is it tourism?
The major source of income from Sri Lanka come from three main sources. The first one is textile and apparel, which is the same as Bangladesh and some developing economies. And then another special case of exports for Sri Lanka is food process, especially tea and spices. And the last important source of income that flows into Sri Lanka come from tourism sector.
Okay, which is quite flourishing before the COVID-19.
Correct. Especially after the war, the civil war between Tamil people and Sinhala people, got to the end by the year 2009. So after that, Sri Lanka is a peaceful countries, Buddhism countries that encourage a lot of tourists to visit Sri Lanka each year.
So if Sri Lanka is considered to be a middle level income country, I was even more curious how all this happened, the economic crisis.
Because after the political reform back in the mid of 1990s, the presidents of the countries gained more power in order to control the executive branch as well as the legal branch. And for the past 20 to 30 years, all the presidents come only from one party, Sri Lanka Freedom Parties. And lately, for the past 20 years, there's only two families, political families in Sri Lanka that rules the country, either Rajapaksa or Sri Sena. Hence, we see the problems of chronic capitalism. And when Sri Sena came, they always blame Rajapaksa that all the infrastructure project, all the mega project that initiated by Rajapaksa is not good. So let's stop it and renew again and built by Sri Sena. And when Sri Sena go out of the power, Rajapaksa come back and do the same thing. Hence, we don't see any economic reform. We don't see any continued economic policy, as well as we don't see a strong infrastructure development in Sri Lanka. That's why all the monies that flow into Sri Lanka, because they already upgraded into the middle income countries, upper middle income countries, mainly flows to speculation, especially speculations on the plot of land, speculations on condominium, office building. Exactly the same way things happened in Thailand and Southeast Asia back in the late 1990s, where we doomed by Asian financial crisis of 1997. And of course, another thing that is pretty much the same is that Sri Lanka encouraged money or encouraged investment to flow into the country by fix it Sri Lankan rupees with the US dollars to ensure that the investor will not face with the exchange rate risk. So when all the money flows into the countries, but not create a productivities, it's not upgrade human capital, it's not upgrade how they produce, how they're doing business. So this speculation money create an economic bubble. And one day, when you see that the late, prime minister, the late president, the cabinet of Sri Lanka, most of them carry the same surname, which is Rajapaksa. They do the wrong economic policy. For example, when they think they run out of the US dollars, and the way they spend a lot of US dollar is to import fertilizer in order to and agricultural chemicals in order to produce a very high quality, high volume of agricultural products. They said, oh, in order to stop losing uh, money, losing US dollars to import fertilizer and agricultural chemicals, why don't we repositioning our countries to be the 100% organic farmland? So the Ministry of Agriculture, which is the big brother and the oldest brother of Rajapaksa
Yes.
brotherhoods, who is
Also
the
from Rajapaksa.
so he just banned import and usage of agricultural chemicals as well as fertilizer. Hence, within 1 year, the total volume of agricultural product of Sri Lanka dropped by 40% and create a lot of hunger, create a lot of food crisis within Sri Lanka. So when your volume of agricultural lower, that means they cannot export anymore. They don't have even food to eat. So they have to spend even more money in order to import rice. Sri Lanka used to be the countries that have rice for its own.
Yes.
Now, with the wrong policy, they have to import rice, and at the same time, they cannot export other product as well because the volume of production is totally go down. Hence, they even run out more US dollars, and at the same time, uh, they got hit by COVID-19. Hence, another sources of income, which is tourism industry, also run out of business because nobody can visit Sri Lanka during COVID-19. Hence, these problems create a lot more. A lot more worsen situations because they cannot find US dollars. There's no US dollar flows into Sri Lanka anymore. And as you know, during the COVID-19, most of the investment is stopped. Hence, this is the doom situations. And last but not least, it's worsened because this economic crisis also come with the energy crisis. Since Rajapaksa Brotherhoods also control the irrigation systems, the Ministry of Irrigations and Water Resources, and uh, this minister do the wrong policy in order to control the water management systems. Hence, all the electricity dam is run out of water right now, so they cannot generate its own electricities. And Sri Lanka is the country that have to import natural gas as well as crude oil, but they run out of US dollars, so they cannot even buy petroleum product, oil, gas, in order to generate electricity for the people. That's
Yes.
why this crisis is it's the worst in Sri Lankan history.
Since the independence. And I was surprised that Sri Lanka could not even produce a very basic necessity good. It's like almost all of their everyday products must be imported from other countries.
Correct.
And
Because if you see the labor force structure classified by occupations, we'll see that about 1/4 of the people of Sri Lanka work in farmland, in agricultural sectors. Another 1/4 in industry, and about half of the Sri Lankan people work in service sectors. And when I talk about service sectors, it means tourism and related to tourism sector, which is, for example, logistics, because it's located in the good strategic locations in the Bay of Bengal, and tourism sectors, food, restaurant, which is not, they cannot produce manufacturing goods to serve the domestic demand.
okay, and I just look at the latest data. It said that Sri Lanka now only has about $1.9 billion foreign exchange reserve left, which is very
Correct.
little, and it
Correct. But
has
the debt burden of Sri
And
Lanka, both private sectors and public sectors, it's about 9 billion US dollars. Hence, they
yes,
don't
and
have enough international reserves to pay for that debt.
yeah, and how are they going to plan to settle that debt by the end of the year?
Now they announced they already stopped paying the debt, both private sectors and public sectors. And the next stage is Sri Lanka need to ask for the assistance from International Monetary Fund in order to borrow money to use as the international reserves. And at the same time, they have to change their foreign exchange rate regimes from fixed exchange rate to flexible exchange rates in order to use the market mechanism to reflect the real value of Sri Lankan rupee. And of course, we can expect the heavy depreciations on Sri Lankan rupee, and this will lead to the opportunity for Sri Lanka to export more. And more export will lead to the inflow of foreign currencies. So they'll gather bit by bit international reserves. And if they can do it with the political reform, we can still see a bright futures of Sri Lanka in maybe the next 3-4 years.
Okay, but for now, with all the protesting on the street, all the violence and all the food shortage and energy crisis, could we consider Sri Lanka as a failed state right now?
Um, it's depend on how you define the failed states. If you define the failed state as the situations when the government doesn't have enough power in order to control thing in the countries, so Sri Lanka is already in the failed states because right now, all the in I think last 2 months, all the minister just resigned from the positions, and then Rajapaksa, I mean the brother Gotabaya and the Gotabaya, who is right now the president, and
Yes,
Mahinta, who is the prime minister. They just set up a new cabinet, and the new cabinets come with the same names. So people get mad
yes.
and run out to streets and do the protest and start to burning down everything. And I think the current situation it's we see the behind the scene talk between Rajapaksa and Sirisena, as well as the high ranked in Sri Lanka freedom parties. So we can expect a new leaders hopefully soon, because this is the thing that they need the most to get confidence on who is going to be the leaders to bring Sri Lanka out of this crisis.
Okay. So what are the things that Sri Lanka people demanding right now? Do they want to get rid of the Rajapaksa family from the government?
I think the first thing they need right now is energy. You know, at the worst point, they have to live in the blackout for 17 hours a day. And
Yes.
when without electricity, the hospital, school, logistic systems, transportations cannot operate. Hence, they're living in dark for most of the day. Hence, this is the thing they need the most. And of course, in order to generate this thing, hopefully when the monsoon season comes, they can gather more waters in the electricity dam to generate electrics. And at the same time, with the depreciated Sri Lankan rupees, they can export more in order to gather foreign exchange currencies to buy uh, crude oil and petroleum product as well as the natural gas.
Okay. And we know that Sri Lanka has got a lot of investment coming in from China in the past few years.
Correct.
Couldn't the Chinese investments save Sri Lanka from this economic crisis?
As I told you, when the politics changed in Sri Lanka from Rajapaksa to Sirisena and from Sirisena back to Rajapaksa, most of the infrastructure development is, on and off. Hence, most of the project is not finished yet. And without the whole systems, it's very, very difficult in order to use that incomplete infrastructure to generate incomes. Even the biggest port city is Hambantota, they still cannot complete the whole project. Hence, with some part of the seaport, without software, without crane, without tools, they still cannot utilize that seaport. That's why that seaport it's more like a burden right now. But of course, the situation is not that worse because when China and Sri Lanka joined their hand to initiate that kind of product, they set up a new special purpose vehicle, a new company, more like a state-owned enterprises,
Yes.
and Chinese government hold a larger proportions of the share of the stock on that company. The larger shareholders mean the largest burden when the project gone down, right? Hence, China and Sri Lanka share this burden, but Chinese government, Chinese state-owned enterprises seems to share a lot more burden compared to Sri Lanka.
Okay. And now Sri Lanka is asking IMF for loans, and also I think they're also asking India, China, and other rich country like Japan and South Korea for financial assistance. How
Correct.
how is that going right now? Are they receiving?
I think
Uh,
this is the time for India. India and Sri Lanka never have a good relations between them because Tamil is the minority group of people in Sri Lanka, but Tamil
yes.
people have a very large amount of number of population in southern part of India, and sometimes Indian government even absurd or interfere with the domestic affair, domestic conflict between Sinhala people and Tamil people. Hence, the relations between Sri Lanka and India is not very well. But after so many years, after so many conflicts, right now Indian government changed their policy towards the policy so-called neighboring country first.
Okay.
Hence, Indian government currently transfer a large sum of money to Sri Lanka in order to help uh, balance the economic transactions, everyday transactions in Sri Lanka, as well as resell the cheaper crude oil and petroleum product Indian brought from Russia to Sri Lanka at the lower price. Hence, Sri Lanka also changed their policy as well to be like Indian first right now. Hence, in the near futures, we can expect a good or a better relations between the member of South Asian communities.
Okay, because I think that India is also a big big players in the South
Of course,
Asian
in
nation.
right now, India try very hard in order to position itself as the big brother, and Thailand as well as Myanmar, who is another ASEAN member, we join our hand and initiates the uh, FTA and economic cooperation with South Asian countries. We call it BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC, Bay of Bengal initiatives for multi-sectoral
Yes.
economic and social cooperations, which is currently Thailand is the chairperson. It's the chair of these BIMSTEC operations. So if we see better um, relations in these regions, as well as they can agree on one point, that the important point that they both Sri Lanka, India, Myanmar, Thailand, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, who is the members of BIMSTEC, agree right now is that they don't need the interference from the superpower outside the regions. That means we can determine our own destiny, which is very good because the structures of BIMSTEC already updated when they implement the BIMSTEC charter this year. Hence, this is the good opportunity for Thailand to push forward on the corporations and the assistance in these regions, and of course, this will open the business opportunity for Thai entrepreneur as well.
Okay, and if all this work really well, maybe we can expect to see the Sri Lanka recover in the next 4 or 5 years, like you said.
Normally the economic crisis will last about like 3 4 years. Hence, if we count 2022 as the first year of economic crisis, I think it will hit the bottom next year, 2023, and after that we'll see the recovery. So 3 4 years, Sri Lanka will come back, will bounce back.
But only if there is the
Yes,
change in politics, that because if the politics in Sri Lanka is still controlled by one or two family, this might repeat itself again.
correct. That this is the lesson learned, and they learn the hard way. Even we, Thailand and Southeast Asia, already set a very good example or a very bad examples since the Asian financial crisis 1997. But of course,
Okay.
people sometimes don't learn.
Okay, and lastly, what are some of the things that Thailand could learn from Sri Lanka so that the same thing wouldn't happen to Thailand in the year 2022 or in the near future?
Absolute power collapse absolutely. This is the thing that we can learn. Hence, we have to learn from the past and try not to create these problems more. The chronic capitalism, the struggle capitalism, the struggle democracy. This is not good. This is not healthy for the futures of any countries in the world.
Okay, thank you, Ajahn Piti, very much for talking with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
สวัสดีครับ
Yeah.
And that's all for Voice of the Nation. Thank you for staying with us.